This is the first of two lectures on the moral philosophy of Immanuel Kant. Kant is one of the main figures in modern moral philosophy, so we need to cover some of the basic points in his philosophy, which is often referred to as deontological ethics. So we'll talk more about what that means momentarily. Kant opens this selection from the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals by asking about the nature of the good. What is good? Is there anything in particular that is good without qualification? In other words, that's unconditionally good, that we can say it's always good, rather than having to qualify that claim by saying, it's good sometimes under these conditions, but other times maybe it might not be so good. So he considers maybe talents of mind, understanding, wit, judgment, things like that. Those are good things. It's good to be intelligent, it's good to be funny, to have prudent judgment. But he doesn't think that those are unqualifiedly good because they can be used to bad ends. The same is true with virtues of character. Things like courage, resolve, perseverance. Those are typically good things, but they could also be misused, directed toward bad ends. And similarly, gifts of fortune, things like power, riches, honor, health and beauty, happiness. Those are good things most of the time, but not without qualification. We have to say they're good if they're used well. But power or money could also be destructive if it's not used well. So none of these things are good without qualification. We have to qualify their goodness in each case. We need to say they're good so long as we use them well, or so long as we deserve them. Those are the qualifications he means. So there's only one thing that ultimately is good without qualification, according to Kant, and that is a good will. So it's only a good will that makes these things fully good. That's why they're not good without qualification. Even happiness. Kant thinks that even with happiness, unless a good will is present to correct the whole principle of action and bring it into conformity with universal ends, even happiness is not good. Now, by universal ends, he means what's required of everyone. Universal in the sense that this duty applies to everyone. And he says if we consider this from the perspective of an impartial, rational spectator, we can see how this is true. We take no delight in seeing the uninterrupted prosperity of someone who is evil or corrupt. We don't like to see someone being happy when they don't deserve it. And so consider the example of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Imagine if that movie ended with the Kingpin winning. He defeats Spider-Man and all the different Spider-Men from different universes in the multiverse. Defeats Spider-Gwen. And he ends up getting his family back, and he's happy, and the good guys are crushed. From an impartial perspective, we can't help but feel like something's wrong there. We don't want Kingpin to win and be happy. We want the good guys to win. And from Kingpin's perspective, that would be a happy ending. But the key for Kant is to transcend our partial perspective. Because, of course, Kingpin is partial. He wants to win because he wants to get his own way. And he thinks that's what will make him happy. Kant is asking us to transcend that partial individual perspective and see it from an impartial, rational perspective. Like if we were looking at things from the outside, watching a movie. Clearly we want the good guys to win, and we're not going to be happy seeing the bad guys thrive in their badness. Now, that's always the tricky thing, is that we tend to be very partial toward ourselves. we want to make ourselves the exception. Again, that's why we need to consider things from that universal point of view. And that's what reason allows us to do. Now, Kant's ethics, his moral philosophy, is often described as deontological, which means duty-based. That comes from the Greek word deon, which means duty or obligation or necessity. Now, contra virtue ethics, against virtue ethics, Kant believes that virtue has no inner unconditional worth. It says, however unconditionally the virtues were praised by the ancients, the virtues can still be misdirected. What has pure unconditional worth is the goodwill, and that's what allows the virtues to be a good thing. Contra consequentialism, philosophies like utilitarianism, Kant argues that the goodwill is good not because of what it accomplishes, not because of the consequences that follow from it, not because it leads to happiness or utility. The goodwill is good because of what it wills. Even if it fails to achieve its intended outcome, the goodwill is still good. So utility, usefulness, consequences aren't what make actions good. Now, according to Kant, the human being has a unique vocation, a unique task or calling by virtue of having reason. Because we have reason, we have this task or vocation to produce a will that's good in itself. Nature didn't simply intend for us to be happy. That's not our end or our goal. If that was the goal, nature would have been better just to give us instinct and no reason and no will, because instinct would have been a better guide to what was just going to make us happy. Life would have been a lot simpler in that case. Instead, nature has given us reason and will, and that makes life more difficult. At the same time, it also gives us a higher dignity. We have this higher vocation, and it allows us to live at the level of what's right and what's good, rather than just seeking to live according to our appetites. And Kant makes a vital distinction then when he's talking about duty between acting in conformity with duty and acting from duty. And it's acting from duty that has moral worth, that is morally praiseworthy. So he gives the example of the shopkeeper. Imagine the shopkeeper has a naive, innocent customer, somebody who doesn't have any clue what things cost in this part of the country maybe, or in this kind of market. So the shopkeeper could easily take advantage of the customer, overcharging them, ripping them off. But the shopkeeper doesn't. So the question is, why does the shopkeeper not rip off this innocent customer? Well, suppose it's because it's good for business. The shopkeeper is honest because he doesn't want to get a reputation for cheating customers. Maybe it gets out that he ripped off this person. And if that happens, then it's going to be bad for business. Kant argues that acting in this way is in conformity with our duty to be honest. So we have a duty to be honest, not to cheat people, not to rip them off. And the action is in conformity with that duty. It's a good thing that the shopkeeper isn't cheating. But the action isn't good without qualification because he has other motives. And the shopkeeper's motives are to have good business. And so his action, according to Kant, has no moral worth. It has no moral content. It's simply prudent. He's just calculating what the best way is to have a good business. So it's not that it's a bad thing, but it can't be praised as a good thing either. He's just acting prudently. Now, this is different then from acting from duty. When a person acts from duty, their action has real moral worth because they're doing it because it's the right thing. That's what it means to do it from duty. They're doing it because it's the right thing, not because of some sort of inclination or calculation of consequences that this is going to be good for business. In fact, sometimes acting from duty might even be bad for business. But it's our duty to do the right thing regardless. According to Kant, the ends never justify the means. And that's in contrast to consequentialism. Consequentialism argues it's exactly the ends that justify the means. It's the outcome that determines whether an action is good. Kant says, instead, we can never really know what the consequences will be. We'd have to be omniscient. We'd have to be like God, basically, to know for sure what's going to happen. All we can do is make sure that we're doing the right thing for the right reasons. And similarly, he says this is different from virtue ethics as well, because acting from duty isn't about forming virtuous character. It's not about trying to become a better person or have better character, to cultivate virtues so that we can be happy. And so the goal isn't happiness. Instead, it's to become worthy of happiness, if at some point I do end up becoming happy. And so it's all about the goodwill and becoming worthy of happiness, if there is at some point happiness to be found.